What happens when a guard shoves an elderly veteran out of a museum for offering his war relic? The injustice stings, but what unfolds in mere minutes will leave everyone speechless. I've walked these streets for 78 years, and let me tell you, they don't get any kinder with time. The sun was high over Washington, D.C. that morning, painting the marble steps of the National Military History Museum with a golden glow that felt almost sacred. I stood there, my cane digging into the pavement, my old tweed jacket hanging loose on shoulders that used to carry a rifle and a rucksack through jungles half a world away. In my pocket, wrapped in a faded handkerchief, was a dog tag. Mine, from Vietnam, scratched and worn like the man who carried it. I'd come to give it to the museum, to let it sit in a glass case where maybe someone, someday, would read my name and wonder about the life behind it. Walter Grayson, U.S. Army. Just a small piece of metal, but it held every sleepless night, every brother lost, every promise I kept. The museum's glass doors gleamed, reflecting the bustle of tourists and the distant hum of traffic. Inside, the air was cool, heavy with the weight of history. Polished floors, glass cases filled with medals, and photographs of men who looked like they'd seen what I had. I shuffled forward, my loafers scuffing against the marble, each step a reminder of the shrapnel scar that still ached in my hip when the weather turned. A group of school kids rushed past, their laughter sharp as a bayonet, their teacher hollering to keep them in line. I smiled to myself, thinking of my grandson, Tommy, who'd be about their age, all energy and questions. Kids don't know the weight of places like this. Not yet. I made it to the front desk, where a young woman, Emily, her name tag said, was hunched over a computer, her fingers dancing across the keys like they were chasing a deadline. Her hair was pulled back tight, her face pinched with the kind of stress you wear when you're young and think the world's watching. I cleared my throat, my voice low, carrying the Georgia drawl I never quite shook off. "Excuse me, ma'am. I heard you're taking donations for the new Vietnam exhibit. I've got something I'd like to offer." Emily didn't look up, her eyes glued to the screen. "Donations are by appointment only," she said, her voice flat, like she'd said it 100 times that day. "You need to fill out a form online first." I blinked, caught off guard. I don't own a computer. Never saw the need, not when life's lessons come from living, not clicking. "Didn't know that," I said, keeping my tone even. "I don't have one of those at home. Just brought this dog tag from my time in Vietnam. Thought it might mean something to someone." She finally glanced at me, her eyes flicking over my jacket, my cane, my lined face. I saw it then. The quick judgment. The kind you get when people think you're just an old man taking up space. "We have protocols," she said, a little sharper now. "It's a liability thing. You can't just walk in with stuff. Go online or call for an appointment." I nodded, my fingers brushing the dog tag in my pocket. It felt heavier now, like it was pulling me back to those nights in the jungle, the mud sucking at my boots, the air thick with fear. "I understand," I said, though I didn't, not really. I was hoping to share its story. Maybe someone here might— "Look, sir," she cut me off, her voice like a door slamming shut. "We're swamped today. Big group coming in soon. I don't have time for walk-ins. Come back another day." I felt the sting, not just of her words, but of the dismissal, the way she looked through me like I was a ghost. I've faced worse, mortars, ambushes, the kind of loss that carves out your soul. But this was a different kind of wound. I opened my mouth to try again, but a shadow loomed over me, heavy boots thudding against the marble. "Hey, old man, you're holding up the line!" The voice was loud, brash, cutting through the museum's quiet like a chainsaw. I turned to see a security guard, Derek, his badge read, striding toward me. He was young, maybe 30, built like a linebacker, with a buzz cut and a scowl that said he'd already decided I was trouble. "Move it along, we've got people waiting." I glanced behind me and saw a small line of tourists, some tapping their feet, others craning their necks to see what the holdup was. "I'm sorry," I said, stepping aside, my cane tapping softly. "Didn't mean to cause a fuss." Derek didn't ease up. He crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. Yeah, well, you're causing one. This isn't a yard sale. You can't just show up with junk and expect us to take it. Junk. The word hit me like a slap, but I kept my face steady. I've learned over the years that anger doesn't win battles like this. It's not junk, I said, my voice low, almost a whisper. It's something I carried a long time. Something that meant something. He rolled his eyes, the kind of gesture that makes you wonder when people stopped listening. Whatever, Pops. Clear out. We've got important folks coming, and we don't need stragglers clogging the place. Stragglers. I felt it in my chest, a slow burn, not just for me, but for every man who wore a tag like mine, who came home to a country that didn't always know how to say thank you. I nodded, pressing my lips tight, and started to turn away. But Emily waved Derek closer, her voice low but sharp. Can you just deal with this? I've got a million things to do before the VIPs get here. Derek didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, his hand clamping onto my arm, his grip like a vice. All right, let's go, he said, his voice loud enough to turn heads. I stumbled, my cane skittering against the floor, my bad hip screaming in protest. The kids nearby went quiet, their eyes wide. A woman with a camera hesitated, her lens half raised, as if she wasn't sure whether to snap a picture or step in. The tourists murmured, their whispers like static in my ears. Please, I said, my voice steady despite the pain in my arm. I'm not resisting. I just wanted to help. Help? Derek snorted, his grip tightening as he steered me toward the glass doors. You're helping by getting out. We don't have time for this. I've faced down men with guns, men who wanted me dead. But this public shaming in a place meant to honor sacrifice, cut deeper than I expected. I wanted to tell him about Firebase Charlie, about the boys who didn't make it, about the dog tag that outlived them all. But his hand was heavy, his boots loud, and the doors were getting closer. The crowd watched, some shocked, some indifferent, their faces a blur of pity and curiosity. As we reached the entrance, Derek gave me a final push, not enough to knock me down, but enough to make me stagger onto the stone steps outside. The doors swung shut, sealing me out with a hiss, the cool air of the museum replaced by the sticky heat of D.C. I steadied myself, my cane trembling in my hand, my breath uneven. The dog tag in my pocket felt like a stone, pulling me toward memories I'd come here to share, not bury. I stood there, the city moving around me, buses rumbling, people rushing past, life going on like nothing had happened. But something had. I felt it in the way my heart pounded, not with anger, but with a quiet resolve. I'd faced worse than Derek and Emily, worse than their small, careless cruelties. But this wasn't just about me. It was about every soldier whose story gets dismissed, every piece of history reduced to junk. I took a step, then another, my cane tapping a rhythm only I could hear. You won't believe who stood up for me. This is only the beginning. It gets harder from here. The stone steps of the National Military History Museum burned under the D.C. sun, each one a silent witness to the indignity I'd just endured. I stood there, my cane planted like a flag, my old tweed jacket sticking to my back in the humid air. My hand, still trembling from Derek's shove, clutched the dog tag in my pocket. Walter Grayson, U.S. Army, a name and number that carried more weight than anyone inside that museum seemed to care about. The city roared around me, buses wheezing, tourists chattering, a street musician strumming a guitar somewhere down the block. But in my chest, there was a quiet storm, a mix of hurt and resolve that I hadn't felt since the days when I'd faced down worse than a loudmouth guard. I took a breath, slow and deep, the kind you take when you're trying to keep your heart from racing. My hip ached, the old shrapnel scar flaring from the stumble Derek forced on me. I looked across the plaza, where a small bench sat under the shade of a maple tree, its leaves rustling in the faint breeze. I needed to sit, to gather myself before I dragged my tired bones back to the bus stop. I shuffled forward, my cane tapping a rhythm against the pavement, each step a small act of defiance. I wasn't running. I was choosing my ground. The plaza was alive with people, Families snapping photos, vendors hawking pretzels and bottled water, a young couple arguing over a map. A few glanced my way, their eyes lingering with that mix of pity and discomfort you get when folks see an old man who's been roughed up. I ignored them, easing onto the bench with a groan, the wood creaking under my weight. My fingers found the dog tag again, pulling it from my pocket. The metal was cool, its edges smoothed by years of handling, the engraved letters catching the sunlight. I turned it over, my thumb tracing the words I'd carried through Vietnam, through mud, blood, and nights when the stars were the only thing keeping me sane. I could still hear my squad, their voices young and brash, joking to drown out the fear. That tag was all I had left of them. A shadow fell over me, sharp and unwelcome. "Hey, you still here?" Derek's voice cut through the plaza's hum, loud and grating, like a car alarm you can't shut off. I looked up to see him at the top of the museum steps, his arms crossed, his scowl deeper than before. His security badge glinted, his buzz cut sharp under the sun. "I told you to move on, old man." I met his eyes, keeping my voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest. "I'm not on your property," I said, gesturing to the public plaza, the fountain sparkling a few yards away. "Just resting before I head home. A man's got a right to catch his breath." Derek descended the steps, his boots thudding like warning shots. "Don't play smart with me," he snapped, his face reddening under his cap. "You're loitering, and we don't need trouble today. Big shots are coming, and I'm not letting you screw things up." Big shots. I almost chuckled, but the sting of his words kept my lips tight. I've seen big shots before. Generals in starched uniforms, politicians with slick smiles. They come and go, but the men who carry dog tags, who crawl through the mud for them, we're the ones who stay. "I'm not causing trouble," I said, my voice low but firm. "Just sitting here, minding my own." "Don't give me that," Derek shot back, stepping closer, his shadow swallowing the bench. "You think you can just hang around after making a scene? People like you don't belong here. People like me." The words hit like a punch, not to my body, but to something deeper. I've been called worse. Coward, traitor, worse than that when the war ended and folks didn't know what to do with us. But this was a museum, a place meant to honor what I'd given. And here was this kid, barely old enough to shave, telling me I didn't belong. My hand tightened on the dog tag, but I kept my eyes on his. "You don't know a thing about me," I said, my voice carrying a weight I hadn't let out in years. Derek laughed, a harsh bark that turned heads. A pretzel vendor nearby stopped, his cart creaking, his eyes narrowing as he watched. A woman pushing a stroller slowed, her toddler's chatter fading as she glanced our way. "I know enough," Derek said, his voice loud like he wanted the whole plaza to hear. "You're just some old guy stirring up trouble. Now get moving before I call the cops." The threat hung in the air, sharp and heavy. I felt it in my bones, the same way I felt the ground shake under mortar fire all those years ago. But this wasn't a battlefield, and I wasn't a soldier anymore. I was just an old man, sitting on a bench, trying to hold on to a piece of my past. "I served this country," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "I earned the right to sit here." "Served?" Derek scoffed, his grin twisting. "Yeah, right. You probably just swept floors or something. Save your stories for someone who gives a damn." The crowd was growing now, a loose circle forming around us. A man in a suit paused, his phone halfway to his ear, his eyes flicking between me and Derek. A group of teenagers, school kids, probably on the same trip as the ones inside, whispered to each other, their phones out, recording. I saw the pity in some faces, the amusement in others, and it burned. Not for me, but for what they didn't understand. "I don't need to prove anything to you," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. "But you might want to think twice before you talk to a man about his service." Derek stepped closer, his chest puffed out, his boots inches from my feet. "Or what? You gonna swing that cane at me, Grandpa?" He smirked, glancing at the crowd, fishing for laughs. A few of the teenagers snickered, but others shifted, uneasy, their phones still rolling. I felt the weight of their eyes, the judgment, the indifference. It wasn't just Derek. It was the whole damn system, the way it chews up men like me and spits us out when we're no longer useful. I wanted to stand, to tell him about Firebase Charlie, about the night I carried a wounded boy 3 miles through the jungle, but my hip screamed, and my cane felt heavier than ever. Before I could speak, another voice cut in, sharp and irritated. "What's going on here?" It was Emily, standing at the museum's entrance, her arms crossed, her face pinched with annoyance. She wasn't looking at Derek. She was glaring at me, like I was the one causing the ruckus. "Why are you still here? You're making this harder than it needs to be." I turned to her, my heart pounding, but my voice stayed calm. "I was leaving, ma'am. Just needed a moment to rest. Your guard here seems to think I'm a problem." "You are a problem," Derek snapped, his voice louder now, drawing more eyes. The pretzel vendor shook his head, muttering something I couldn't hear. The woman with the stroller looked away, her face tight. One of the teenagers, a girl with braided hair, lowered her phone and whispered to her friend, "This is wrong." But no one stepped forward. No one spoke up. I stood, slow and deliberate, my cane steadying me. "I'm not the one raising my voice," I said, my eyes locking onto Derek's. "I came to honor the past, not to fight, but you're making it mighty hard to walk away." Emily sighed, her exasperation loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Just go, sir. Please. We've got a busy day, and we can't have distractions." Distractions. The word landed like a stone in my gut. I slipped the dog tag back into my pocket, my fingers lingering on its edges. I took a step, then another, my cane tapping against the pavement, each sound a reminder of who I was. Derek followed, his voice trailing me like a bad smell. "Yeah, keep walking. Don't come back with your junk." I didn't look back. I couldn't. But I felt the crowd's eyes, their silence louder than their whispers. I kept moving, my heart heavy but unbroken, the dog tag a quiet promise that I wasn't done yet. What happens next? Nobody saw it coming. But it's what will set things right. The DC sun beat down on the plaza, its heat sinking into my bones as I stood by the fountain, my cane steady against the pavement. My old tweed jacket clung to my back, damp with sweat, but I barely noticed. My hand rested in my pocket, fingers tracing the edges of the dog tag. Walter Grayson, U.S. Army. A relic of a life I'd carried through jungles and years of silence. The city hummed around me, the splash of the fountain, the chatter of tourists, the distant rumble of a bus. But I was still, my heart heavy with the weight of what had happened. Pushed out of a museum meant to honor men like me, dismissed as a nuisance, my story reduced to junk. I wasn't angry, not the way I might have been 50 years ago. Anger burns out in a man my age. What I felt was deeper, a quiet ache for every soldier whose sacrifices get swept aside by folks too busy to listen. I shuffled toward a bench near the fountain, its wooden slats worn smooth by countless others who'd sat here, maybe feeling as out of place as I did. My hip ached from the stumble Derek forced on me, the old shrapnel scar reminding me it was still there, like a ghost that never leaves. I eased myself down, the bench creaking under my weight, and pulled the dog tag out, holding it up to the light. The metal glinted, its engraved letters catching the sun, pulling me back to Vietnam, nights in the mud, the crack of gunfire, the weight of a brother's hand on my shoulder. I closed my eyes, letting the memories wash over me, not to escape, but to hold them close. This tag was more than metal. It was a promise I'd made to men who never came home. A soft voice broke through my thoughts. "Sir, are you all right?" I opened my eyes to see a teenage girl, the one with braided hair from the crowd earlier, standing a few feet away. Her name tag read Sarah, pinned to her school trip lanyard. Her friends hovered behind her, their phones tucked away, their faces uncertain but curious. "What happened back there?" she said, her voice firm. "It wasn't right." I managed a small smile, the kind you give when you're tired but grateful. "I appreciate that, Sarah," I said, my Georgia drawl softening the words. "Just a misunderstanding, I reckon. Folks get busy, forget to listen." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," she said, her eyes flashing with a fire I recognized, the kind that comes from seeing something wrong and not knowing how to fix it. "That guard was awful. And the lady at the desk? She didn't even give you a chance." I chuckled, a low rumble that surprised me. "You're a sharp one, aren't you? I've met worse than them. Takes more than a loudmouth to break an old man like me." I meant it, but the words felt heavier than I intended, carrying the weight of battles fought long before she was born. Sarah sat beside me, her friends lingering nearby, whispering to each other. "What were you trying to give them?" she asked. "You said it was from Vietnam." I held up the dog tag, letting it dangle between my fingers. "This," I said. "Carried it through the war. Thought it might belong in there, with the other stories." I didn't tell her about Firebase Charlie, about the night I dragged a wounded boy through the jungle, his blood soaking my hands. Some stories are too heavy for a kid, even one as sharp as Sarah. Before I could say more, a low rumble cut through the plaza. Engines, smooth and powerful, not like the rattling buses I was used to. I looked up to see 3 black SUVs pulling up to the museum's entrance, their tinted windows gleaming like secrets. Men and women stepped out, their suits crisp, their military uniforms starched, their movements precise as a drill team. A crowd gathered, tourists craning their necks, phones raised to capture the spectacle. I watched, my eyes narrowing, as a tall man in a decorated uniform emerged from the lead vehicle. His shoulders were squared, his brass catching the sun, his gaze sweeping the plaza like he was looking for something, or someone. Inside the museum, I could imagine the chaos. I'd seen it before, the way staff scramble when important folks show up. Emily, the desk clerk, would be fussing over her tablet, her voice tight with nerves. Derek, the guard, would be standing straighter, his bravado replaced by the kind of stiffness you get when you know you're being watched. I didn't know who these people were, but I knew their type, men and women who carried authority like a second skin. I leaned back, my cane resting against the bench, and watched. The plaza grew quieter, the crowd's murmurs softening as a man in a suit broke away from the group. He was younger, maybe 40, with the clipped walk of someone used to giving orders. His eyes scanned the plaza, then locked onto me. He ended a phone call with a quick word and strode toward me, his shoes clicking against the pavement. Sarah tensed, her hand gripping the bench, but I stayed calm, my fingers still on the dog tag. "Mr. Grayson?" he asked, his voice respectful but urgent. "Walter Grayson?" I nodded, slow and careful. "That's me." He extended a hand, his face softening. "Captain James Carter, aide to General Thompson. Sir, we need you inside, right now." I raised an eyebrow, my heart giving a small thud. "Inside?" I said, my voice steady but curious. "I was told I wasn't welcome." Carter's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking toward the museum. "I heard about that, and I'm sorry, but the general needs to speak with you. It's important." Sarah's mouth fell open, her friends whispering excitedly. I stood, my cane steadying me, my hip protesting, but my resolve firm. "All right," I said, slipping the dog tag back into my pocket. "Lead the way." The crowd parted as Carter guided me toward the museum, their eyes following like I was some kind of curiosity. Derek stood at the entrance, his face paling when he saw me, his hands fidgeting with his radio. Emily was nearby, her tablet slipping in her hands, her eyes wide with confusion. "What's he doing back here?" she hissed to Derek, but he didn't answer, his earlier swagger gone. Carter led me to a conference room just off the Vietnam War exhibit, where a group of people in suits and uniforms sat around a polished table. A woman in civilian clothes, Dr. Laura Bennett, her name tag read, stood at a projector, mid-sentence. The room went silent as I entered, my cane tapping softly, each step echoing in the stillness. A man in a general's uniform stood, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. "Sergeant Major Grayson," he said, his voice deep and steady. "It's an honor." I shook his hand, my grip firm despite the years. "Just Walter now, sir," I said, my voice low but clear. Been a long time since anyone called me that. General Thompson's eyes held mine, a flicker of respect in them. "Not to us," he said. "Dr. Bennett was just telling us about Firebase Charlie. 68. Your squad's story is the heart of this exhibit. We didn't know you were here until an aide overheard the incident." I felt the room's eyes on me, heavy and expectant. Derek lingered near the door, his face red, his hands twitching. Emily stood frozen, her tablet clutched like a shield. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the dog tag, placing it on the table. It landed with a soft clink, the sound louder than it should have been. "Came to offer this," I said. "Thought it might belong here." Dr. Bennett stepped forward, her eyes on the tag, her voice trembling. "Mr. Grayson, it's invaluable. Your actions at Firebase Charlie saved lives. We'd be honored to include it." The general turned to Derek and Emily, his gaze cold as steel. "You turned away a man who risked everything for this country," he said. "You have no idea the mistake you made." Derek stammered, but no words came. Emily looked at the floor, her face flushed with shame. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The room buzzed with murmurs, the delegation nodding, some standing to shake my hand. Sarah, who'd followed me inside, stood in the doorway, her eyes shining with pride. The crowd outside grew, visitors and staff drawn to the scene, their whispers turning to applause. I nodded once, my heart steady, and walked out, my cane tapping a rhythm of its own. Derek was escorted away, his badge gone. Emily's supervisor approached, her face grim. I didn't look back. The fountain sparkled as I sat once more, the dog tag gone, but my dignity whole. The world felt right again, if only for a moment.